Victorian London, the largest port in the world. Dark, squalid slums, overcrowded hovels, decaying ancient sewers that flooded the streets, rags, refuse, and a lack of any sort of health care that would be familiar to us today. Rich or poor, it's no small wonder that vermin and disease were an everyday part of life. In a time before public health acts established funding for sanitary measures, pest removal fell to jobbing street folk. If you can think of an unwanted creature or bug, there was probably someone employed in the trade of getting rid of it for you. Rat catchers arguably being the most famous of all, for, in a filthy metropolis, rats were everywhere. Queen Victoria even had her own personal rat catcher, and you can learn more about his life and dangerous work in a video on this channel, link in the description. In the 19th century, the average family was highly unlikely to pay for someone to remove pests for them. Work was generally found in mansions of well-to-do neighbourhoods, where the middle and upper classes could afford the fee. The working classes were employed to do unpleasant and dirty work. From bugs to beetles, noblemen and royalty would pay handsomely to get even just a single pesky little creature out of their house. Today, in an account by the Victorian journalist Henry Mayhew, you will discover the life and work of Queen Victoria's personal bug destroyer. In the 1840s, Mayhew observed and documented the lives of everyday people in Victorian London, interviewing the working classes and making a record of his conversations. He went into great detail about what life was like for the many, and not the few in the capital, which, at that time, was perhaps the richest city in the world. He describes with first-hand accounts how hard life really was for the capital's poor. In this account, find out how bugs swarmed everywhere, from servants' belongings to bedsteads, and discover how our bug destroyer was ordered directly to the bedroom of a princess to save her from the torment of a solitary bedbug. Did they have a taste for royal blood? Or was it just that royalty could afford to be more squeamish than common people? Before we move on, if you're interested in history like this, and you want to find out more about what life was really like for people in the past, please consider subscribing for more content. If you'd like to support what we make for you, check out the description for links to ways you can help us continue bringing the past alive. The vending of bug poison in the London streets is seldom followed as a regular source of living. We have met with persons who remember to have seen men selling penny packets of vermin poison, but to find out the vendors themselves was next to an impossibility. The men seem merely to take to the business as a living when all other sources have failed. All, however, agree in acknowledging that there is such a street trade, but that the living it affords is so precarious that few men stop at it longer than 2 or 3 weeks. Perhaps the most eminent firm of the bug destroyers in London is that of Messrs. Tiffin & Son, but they have pursued their calling in the streets and rejoice in the title of Bug Destroyers to Her Majesty and the Royal Family. Mr. Tiffin, the senior partner in this house, most kindly obliged me with the following statement. It may be as well to say that Mr. Tiffin appears to have paid much attention to the subject of bugs, and has studied with much earnestness the natural history of this vermin. "We can trace our business back," he said, "as far as 1695, when one of our ancestors first turned his attention to the destruction of bugs. He was a lady's staymaker, a corset maker. Men used to make them in those days, though as far as that is concerned, it was a man that made my mother's dresses. This ancestor found some bugs in his house, a young colony of them, that had introduced themselves without his permission, and he didn't like their company. So he tried to turn them out of doors again. I have heard it said in various ways. It is in history, and it has been handed down in my own family as well, that bugs were first introduced into England after the fire of London, in the timber that was brought for rebuilding the city.
30 years after the fire, and it was about that time my ancestor first discovered the colony of bugs in his house. I can't say whether he studied the subject of bug destroying, or whether he found out his stuff by accident, but he certainly did invent a compound which completely destroyed the bugs, and having been so successful in his own house, he named it to some of his customers who were similarly plagued, and that was the commencement of the present connection, which has continued up to this time. At the time of the illumination for the peace, celebrations held to commemorate the defeat of Emperor Napoleon in 1814, I thought I must have something over my shop that would be both suitable for the event and to my business. So I had a transparency done, and stretched on a big frame and lit it up by gas, on which was written, "May the destroyers of peace be destroyed by us, Tiffin and Son, bug destroyers to Her Majesty." Our business was formerly carried on in the Strand, where both my father and myself were born. In fact, I may say I was born to the bug business. I remember my father as well as possible. Indeed, I worked with him for 10 or 11 years. He used, when I was a boy, to go out to his work killing bugs at his customers' houses with a sword by his side and a cocked hat and a bag wig on his head. A bag wig was fashionable in the 18th century and contained part of the wig in a decorative bag to the rear of the head. In fact, dressed up like a regular dandy. I remember my grandmother, too, when she was in the business, going to the different houses and seating herself in a chair and telling the men what they were to do, to clean the furniture and wash the woodwork. I have customers in our books for whom our house has worked these 150 years. That is, my father and self have worked for them and their fathers. We do the work by contract, examining the house every year. It is a precaution to keep the place comfortable. You see, servants are apt to bring bugs in their boxes, and though there may be only 2 or 3 bugs perhaps hidden in the woodwork and the clothes, yet they soon breed if left alone. We generally go in the spring, before the bugs lay their eggs, or, if that time passes, it ought to be done before June, before their eggs are hatched, though it's never too late to get rid of a nuisance. I mostly find the bugs in the bedsteads, but if they are left unmolested, they get numerous and climb to the tops of the rooms and about the corners of the ceilings. They colonize anywhere they can, though they're very high-minded and prefer lofty places. Where iron bedsteads are used, the bugs are more in the rooms, and that's why such things are bad. They don't keep a bug away from the person sleeping. Bugs'll come if they're 30 yards off. I knew a case of a bug who used to come every night about 30 or 40 feet. It was an immense large room, from a corner of the room to visit an old lady. There was only one bug, and he'd been there for a long time. I was sent for to find him out. It took me a long time to catch him. In that instance I had to examine every part of the room. When I got him, I gave him an extra nip to serve him out. The reason why I was so bothered was the bug had hidden itself near the window, the last place I should have thought of looking for him, for a bug never by choice faces the light. But when I came to inquire about it, I found that this old lady never rose till 3 o'clock in the day, and the window curtains were always drawn, so that there was no light. Lord, yes, I am often sent for to catch a single bug. I've had to go many, many miles, even 100 or 200, into the country, and perhaps catch only half a dozen bugs after all. But then that's all there are there. So it answers our employer's purpose as well as if they were swarming. I work for the upper classes only, that is, for carriage company and such like. Approaching it, you know, I have noblemen's names, the first in England on my books. My work is more method, and I may call it a scientific treating of the bugs rather than wholesale murder. We don't care about the thousands. It's the last bug we look for, whilst your carpenters and upholsterers leave as many behind them, perhaps, as they manage to catch. The bite of the bug is very curious. They bite all persons the same, but the difference of effect lays in the constitution of the parties. I've never noticed that a different kind of skin makes any difference in being bitten. Whether the skin is moist or dry, it don't matter. Wherever bugs are, the person sleeping in the bed is sure to be fed on, whether they are marked or not, and as a proof, when nobody has slept in the bed for some time, the bugs become quite flat, and, on the contrary, when the bed is always occupied, they are round as a ladybird. The flat bug is more ravenous, though even he will allow you time to go to sleep before he begins with you, or at least until he thinks you ought to be asleep. When they find all quiet, not even a light in the room will prevent their biting. But they are seldom or ever found under the bedclothes. They like a clear ground to get off, and generally bite round the edges of the nightcap or nightdress. When they are found in the bed, it's because the parties have been tossing about and have curled the sheets round the bugs. The finest and fattest bugs I ever saw were those I found in a servant's bed. He was the favourite man of a general. He didn't want his bed done by me. He didn't want it touched. His bed was full of 'em. No beehive was ever fuller. The walls and all were the same. There wasn't a patch that wasn't crammed with them. He must have taken them all over the house wherever he went. I've known persons to be laid up for months through bug bites. There was a very handsome, fair young lady I knew once, and she was much bitten about the arms and neck and face, so that her eyes were so swelled up she couldn't see. The spots rose up like blisters, the same as if stung with a nettle, only on a very large scale. The bites were very much inflamed, and after a time they had the appearance of boils. Some people fancy, and it is historically recorded, that the bug smells because it has no vent, but this is fabulous, for they have a vent. It is not the human blood neither that makes them smell, because a young bug who has never touched a drop will smell. They breathe, I believe, through their sides, but I can't answer for that, though it's not through the head. They haven't got a mouth, but they insert into the skin the point of a tube, which is quite as fine as a hair, through which they draw up the blood. I've many a time put a bug on the back of my hand to see how they bite, though I never felt the bite but once. Then I suppose the bug had pitched upon a very tender part, for it was a sharp prick, something like that of a leech bite. I once had a case of lice killing, for my process will answer as well for them as for bugs, though it's a thing I should never follow by choice. Lice seem to harbour pretty much the same as bugs do. I found them in the furniture. It was a nurse that brought them into the house, though she was as nice and clean a looking woman as ever I saw. I should almost imagine the lice must have been in her, for they say there is a disease of that kind. And if the ticks breed in sheep, why should not lice breed in us? For we're but live matter, too. I didn't like myself at all for 2 or 3 days after that lice-killing job. I can assure you, it's the only case of the kind I ever had, and I can promise you it shall be the last. I was once at work on the Princess Charlotte's own bedstead. Princess Charlotte was the daughter of George IV. She died in 1817, so, if this account is in chronological order, the event described here would have taken place between 1814 and 1817. I was in the room, and she asked me if I'd found anything, and I told her no. But just at that minute I did happen to catch one, and upon that she sprang up on the bed, and put her hand on my shoulder to look at it. She had been tormented by the creature, because I was ordered to come directly, and that was the only one I found. When the princess saw it, she said, "Oh, the nasty thing. That's what tormented me last night. Don't let him escape." I think he looked all the better for having tasted royal blood.